This is City Pulse Newsmakers, a weekly look at the issues and the people behind them in Greater Lansing. Brought to you by City Pulse, Lansing's weekly alternative newspaper. And now, here's your host, City Pulse publisher, Burl Schwartz.
Good morning. Today we're going to look at what's going on in the state capitol, and with us are four of the sharpest minds inside the Beltway. The special guest, Ari Adler, who's here as a commentator but is also special projects manager in Governor Snyder's office. Kyle Malone of Mears News. Joe DeSanto of DeSanto Strategies here in Lansing, and Susan Demas of Inside Michigan Politics. Welcome back to all of you. Well, let's start with the budget that the governor unveiled on Wednesday. It is a little bit bigger budget, but Ari, let's start with you. Who are the winners and losers?
Well, I think the priorities have remained the same for the governor, and I think he's going to get some support in the legislature because of that. It's looking at education, looking at public safety. It's the issues that people have been talking about, other than the bigger issue being, of course, the roads and the ballot issue that's going to be coming up. People are talking about schools and public safety generally. So I thought it was interesting to see that was, again, where a lot of the focus was.
It seems like some of the smaller budgetary items took a whack, such as film credits.
They did. The governor was faced with a situation where they had to cut back some of the current budget that we're in because of tax credits that are now being cashed in, and he has to deal with that. Short term, he's going to do it through the budget, and then long term, he's looking at what he can do with that program overall to try to fix the problem that was caused by it.
Kyle, winners and losers.
Yeah, I don't know if there were many winners, to be honest, just because there wasn't a lot of money to go around. I mean, if you had to pick some, I guess you would say the people who are cashing in on those tax credits, General Motors, the big three, the big manufacturers, they're getting these tax credits that are causing a hole in the budget. And as a result, you see K through 12 and higher ed get very small increases, and then the local governments really didn't get a heck of a lot either. You know, they got constitutional revenue sharing, but that's kind of based on a formula that's kind of pushed upon the administration. It's not really established. So they were more celebrating, wow, we didn't get cut. But you would think that during a time of economic growth that they would be actually getting an increase, and they didn't. And so it's put the governor in this situation where now he's got to try and figure out how do we navigate around these tax credits that I didn't really have anything to do with. They were put on during a prior administration, during a much different time in our state history. But I got to have some predictability around this. So I think that's something he's grappling with. I would call this a status quo budget. And I find it interesting that in the end that there had to be cuts. But I thought he did a good job as far as spreading the cuts around to many different programs, so that there wasn't really anything that stood out as far as a cut that I think would capture the general public's imagination.
Susan?
Well, in a way, it's surprising that we're back to deficit budgets. It wasn't that long ago. We had to take some big cuts back in fiscal 12, and, it was looking like we were on the rebound. The governor made a lot of bold choices in tax cuts, but unfortunately, we're not seeing the economic growth there to make up for the difference of these refundable tax credits, and we're back to taking some difficult cuts and making some difficult decisions. And we'll probably have to make more if the road funding proposal goes down on May 5.
Joe?
I think the real losers here are the middle class of Michigan and the little guy and the little gal trying to make ends meet, because a lot of the smaller programs that they've relied on over the years are going to get gutted here in this budget. And I really would say if the governor's economic plan was kicking in year 5, we wouldn't be having these holes even with the tax credits.
Joe, let's talk about the sales tax proposal. It is, the sales taxes are considered regressive, but is there enough in this proposal to balance that out for disadvantaged people?
Well, that's a tough question. I mean, I'm against myself personally against sales tax because it is regressive. I think it needs to be viewed in a much larger perspective with other tax hikes and tax adjustments. So I'm going to hold off on that.
Mm-hmm. Susan, what do you think?
Well, it's a pretty complicated proposal. There's a reason why people call it a Christmas tree. There is, supposedly something there for everybody. Schools would get a pretty big chunk. There would be some more money for local governments. You wouldn't be able to take the school aid fund and use it for general fund programs, which has been a big sticking point over the years. Is that enough to balance out the hit to the average person's wallet? Probably not, but certainly those are some appealing qualities for people who have seen their kids' schools make really big cuts over the years.
All right.
Well, you have to look at what are people getting out of it. Yeah, we're all going to pay a little bit more on our sales tax, but they've removed the sales tax from gas. You'll be paying a gas tax that actually goes to the roads. It simplifies that long-term structural problem that has existed. And you have to look at what are people spending on their cars right now, on their vehicles, because of the damage that's happening because of the damage from the roads, the potholes, and everything else that's going on. It's a safety issue. So there's a lot of things to consider that people are going to have to look at. It's it's one of those things where you talk about it being a Christmas tree. Part of that started, I think, because the basic premise, and I was working in the legislature at the time, was how do we fix that long-term strategic issue of taxes paid at the pump not all going to the roads. And so that was a big thing I know for Speaker Bolger at the time, was how do you fix that, get the sales tax off of gas. So when you do that, then you end up with these holes because people, schools and others have been relying on that sales tax that's on gas. So the idea was, okay, if we're going to help backfill for them, then you end up adding the sales tax. The reality then is you actually end up with more money, and so it's schools and local governments. There was some money to provide for the earned income tax credit. So there ended up being more money than you really needed to do an even swap between
Let's be honest, though,
wholesale
it
tax and
became a
sales tax.
Christmas tree because you had to get Democratic votes because there weren't enough Republican votes to take a leadership position.
I think there were a lot of Republicans. I think there were some Democrats too that were uncomfortable with people saying that we needed to simply raise the gas tax. They weren't going to get tagged with that, and so that was an issue that you came up with. It was something that they were facing a deadline and had to come up with something, and so they worked together and compromised on it. But in the end, you had both sides voting for it. And
if this thing passes, it's not going to be based on intellectual arguments. It's going to be based on emotional arguments.
And Kyle, is there a strategy here that could win passage?
Oh, I think there could be. I think to try and tie this into the budget, I think that it's interesting that what the governor put forward doesn't really give anybody a plan B. I mean, he's got $113 million in that budget, or 135, however you want to calculate it, of general fund money going to transportation, whereas before we had close to $300 million if you go back to the past budget. There's not a lot of room for lawmakers to craft a substantial road funding give out of the general fund, out of this budget, if this thing fails. So he's kind of setting up the legislature into kind of a predicament. Hey, I gave very small increases to K through 12 and higher education and local governments. But if this thing fails, where are you guys? What's your plan to try and get more money into the roads? He's kind of putting them into a box, and maybe they realize that, maybe they don't. And maybe that's part of the strategy, kind of getting to your point on that. Outside of that, though, as far as the general public at large, I think the obvious strategy is raise as much money as humanly possible and then pound this message that the roads are going to swallow up your car. And if they can get that out there, I think they think that hopefully that's enough to get this thing over the top.
They came up a lot yesterday, though, because people were asking about that and saying, why didn't the governor look at spending some of that money? Why didn't he put more money in transportation? I think it was a responsible thing. He doesn't have that money yet, so don't bank on it. Don't spend it in any way. The extra money, the $113 million, if that's the number everybody ends up agreeing on, is what's needed to get your federal match.
Right,
so
the
we're not
bare
leaving
minimum.
the minimum to get all the federal dollars, though. So you're not going to lose any federal money. You're not going to leave any money on the table. The extra money that's been in there in the previous years was the legislature looking at the sales tax on gas, that part that was not constitutionally guaranteed to schools and local governments, and physically moving that from the general fund used for whatever program they want over specifically to roads. So let's say the May ballot proposal fails, would the legislature look at doing that again? That could take you up to the $300 million again, maybe. But it's a question of, that's not a long-term solution. That's been a patchwork solution.
Well, no, it has been, but there isn't $100 million to kind of throw around here. I mean, where are they going to get that $100 million? I guess that's my point.
Well, if they tap into if the ballot proposal fails, you still have a sales tax on gas in place. So you take that 2 cents of the sales tax, it's not dedicated to anything else, and the legislature could move that over to transportation, as they have done in the past.
Right, but then that will create holes somewhere else, though.
Well, it's about
It will create
priorities.
holes. It will create massive gaps of cuts that are going to have to be backfilled.
Right. Or yeah, I mean there would probably be cuts unless they do a tax increase of some sort.
And who knows, if more companies cash in those tax credits, we could have an even bigger problem.
Well, and the thing about that too is people may have seen this coming, but the reality is that the economy is actually starting to do better, and that's why the credits are getting cashed in. They were given out at a time when it was a very different time in Michigan, as you said. The economy was struggling, and they were trying to figure out how to keep jobs, how to get these companies to stay. And the idea was, we'll gladly pay you Tuesday for a hamburger today, and now it's Tuesday. So the economy's gotten better. They're able to cash in these credits, and that's why the governor has been working on this personally to try to fix that program.
Well, it would seem like a logical place to do a fix would be back in 2011, when the governor was first in office. Actually, the standards for cashing in were lowered. It would seem to make sense to tighten that up again.
Part of the issue, I think, is that since the governor's been in, he's made a lot of changes at MEDC, and they're trying to fix what was there before. So what we have now at MEDC and what we had before are very different. But you're still facing a situation where that exists, and you can't. Some people have said, well, just ignore them, don't let them have their credits. That's really bad
You
long
could
term
get
for
rid of
business,
the
too.
MEDC, as the Mackinac Center suggests every year.
Well,
But
let
it
me
does a lot
ask
of good things too.
Let me ask you about that. The Mackinac Center, the Free Press reported today, is sensing a growing support for abolishing MEDC. Is that even is that a real possibility?
No.
No?
No, I mean, no, that's
Sponsor
not a.
Todd
That's not
Corser, I
a
doubt it has much legislative legs. I think it has to come from someone maybe a little bit more responsible.
I think there is a bipartisan desire to do so. I think the average voter has no idea what MEDC is, but you can describe it in such a way that they would get very riled up about it.
It's the Michigan Economic Development Corporation. What is it they do?
Well, they are supposed to encourage economic growth, which usually means in the form
giveaways.
of tax breaks, supposedly tied to performance, but as we know, it's sometimes hard to demonstrate that, isn't it?
Yeah, empirical evidence is quite hard to come by.
Ari, do you agree with that? Is MEDC not, is it a shell game?
Well, I think it's you asked people want to get rid of it. I think it's a bit of a whipping boy at this point, but it's in some ways it's unfortunate because it does a lot of different things. There are a lot of different components to MEDC, and things have
And
changed
not all are bad.
in the past few years. Well, and yeah, I mean, here in Michigan, for example, the tourism arm is now under MEDC, and there's the strategic fund. There's all these different things that are done. Some people agree with some of it, not all of it, but it's easy to. I think, as Susan said, you can identify it in a lot of different ways, and depending on what your position is on it, you're going to identify it in a way that makes it sound good or bad, depending on what you like or don't like
Well,
about
I'm
it.
more interested in the actual results of it. I mean, let's talk film credits. It's wonderful they filmed Batman versus Superman here in Michigan. Okay, I'm day one buyer. They'll get my $850, but I don't think we need to be funding millionaires in Los Angeles. And I know that's going to make many of my friends who work in that industry angry. But I'm sorry. These are films that make $1 billion.
But isn't the reason for it to raise the profile of Michigan?
Well, part of the problem is these producers chase the credits. So Louisiana, where a lot of filming is done nowadays, made their credits more valuable to Michigan. Stuff that was going to be in Michigan shifted to Shreveport. Now California is looking at creating their own credits to rebuild their film industry. So the producers go where they get the best deal.
And to some degree, that's the entire game of these economic development corporations. Right. We're all in competition with each other. Every state is. And to some degree, there aren't a lot of jobs that are created. It's just a matter of where the jobs are and where the jobs move.
And if we're not a part of it, then Michigan loses out. You could conceivably argue. If we're not a part of the game, then you're just conceding right off the bat, and you're never going to win.
Instead of having a slightly growing economy, we might have a failing economy.
The governor released yesterday saying some of these MEDC jobs cost $73,000 a piece to create.
Yeah, the numbers are never really all that good, are they?
No,
I mean,
they're
you
not.
take a look at them when they come back in, and then the job projection numbers they come out with. You could you could widen that out and say you could employ every man, woman, and child in Oakland County if that was the case.
But that's part of why you can't rely on it solely. I mean, you're right. I mean, around the country, everywhere, whether it's economic development or film credits or anything else, it is trying to one up each other constantly, and there's a constant flow of trying to get better than the other state. Well, but the issue is then what that does is it gets you the attention, but then what do they have when they get here? And that's why the changes have been made in tax codes and everything else. And you have to get the economy, you have to have good roads, you have to have a lot of things to make businesses want to relocate here or to build and expand here.
And we also have the unknown here too. What if those tax credits weren't made available to General Motors and Ford and Chrysler? Would they have decided, oh, we're going to move our headquarters somewhere else? I mean, it doesn't seem likely, but we don't really know that. So a lot of it's kind of hindsight too.
A lot of it seems like a stick-up.
Kind of does.
Kyle, what is HICA and why should I care?
HICA is the Health Insurance Claims Assessment. That is a tool that the state government uses to get the money we need to from the federal government for Medicaid. In order to get our Medicaid match for a certain population, we end up having to tax ourselves to get money for the federal government so we have more money. So you got to tax me $50 so I can get $200, something like that. And what has happened is that we've kind of tried to find different and creative ways to get this Medicaid money. And the most recent thing we tried was a use tax expansion that the federal government said, well, you can't use that. I appreciate you all trying. You can't do it. So you got to go back to this tax on health insurance claims that the health industry doesn't like because it raises the costs on everybody to, again, benefit people on Medicaid, which I guess you can say is a necessary goal. The problem on this, though, is that it is a tax increase. And it's very hard for Republicans, obviously, to support tax increases, but it's a necessary tax increase to get Medicaid. And if you don't do it, then you got to find money somewhere else. And so that's what makes this HICA tax, I think, one of the stickiest parts of this budget. You're going to have to rely on Democrats to help you, and you've really kind of poisoned the well already early as far as getting their support on anything.
Is this going to contribute eventually to people saying this Medicaid expansion was the mistake we told you?
Well, but this problem existed before the Medicaid expansion. It's just a way that we have come up with the money for that program. And the reason why we did the Medicaid expansion was because the Snyder administration took a look at the numbers and said, the Medicaid expansion makes financial sense. We actually get more money as a state. It's better for the overall economy, and we'd be spending more if we didn't cover these people. And that's just for the expansion. It would be an enormous cost to everybody if we didn't have the Medicaid program, because that would be costs that wouldn't be picked up and the hospitals would just spread it all around. Trying to get people to vote for a tax increase, even though the numbers add up, is always hard anyway.
Ari, the governor has signed an order to combine two big departments, community health and human services. It seems very un-Republican to create an even bigger department. What's going on here?
Well, he is looking at combining those two departments into one, and you say it seems like it's going to be a bigger department, and it will overall when you look at the number of staff and the budget and everything else. But the idea is, how do you look at getting rid of programs or combining programs that are duplicative? And how do you streamline the process that people have to go to get something done if they need help from government? So you don't have to figure out, I don't think the general public, if you ask them, do you go to the Department of Human Services or to the Department of Community Health, would know where they're supposed to go. And there are times that people need help where a program is literally split between the two departments. So they can go to one department and get a certain amount of help, but to get to the next step, they have to go to a completely different department. So the idea is, how do you streamline that? How do you get rid of some services that are in programs that are designed to exist as opposed to really helping the people? And the governor has his river of opportunity that he's been pushing, and that's the idea of how do you get these folks some help where they can walk in and the program is flexible enough to meet their needs, as opposed to them having to figure out which individual programs they have to work with.
Joe, do you see any concerns about this merger?
Well, I think there's a lot of concerns about how it's done. I think the governor deserves credit for trying to find some efficiencies here, but the devil's in the details, and I think you run the risk of people getting hurt along the way. I would hope that's not the case, and I honestly, I give the governor the benefit of the doubt on this one.
Kyle?
Well, you know, this is a very tricky thing that they're trying. I mean, we're talking about 140 some waivers that they'd have to end up getting to combine these programs. It's been tried before. Tried back in the 70s. There wasn't legislative support for it. Now it seems like the wheels are greased a little bit. But here you have in state government 2 departments that are viewed entirely different. The Department of Community Health, by and large, has been a very well-run operation historically. And you got the Department of Human Services that has historically not been, and has been a department where there's been issues. And now you're combining them. So what comes out of this? Do you get something that looks like the Department of Human Services, which wouldn't be good, or something like the Department of Community Health that would be good? I think this is going to be a slow process. I think that the deadlines that they've established for themselves are pretty aggressive, and I wouldn't be surprised if this thing stretches out a couple years just because of the complexity
What
to
are
make
the
sure we get
odds
this right.
of the federal government granting 120 of the waivers?
Well, see, that's the other thing, too. I mean, that in itself takes time. So I wouldn't be surprised if this stretches out a lot longer than you
This
might
could
think.
be a big chunk of his second term.
It will take a lot of time. I mean, there's a lot of work to be done there, and you know, people were asking me the other day. They're like, "Well, where's all the changes in the budget because of this change?" Well, they don't know exactly where that's going to be yet because Nick Line and his team need time to figure out what are we going to do. Don't build this new department based on a budget push. Get it built based on what needs to be done. As far as waivers to the feds, and we did Medicaid expansion, the only way they got it through the Republican legislature was to say, okay, feds, we'll take your money, but only if you give it to us with these following conditions. And everybody said the feds would never go for it. They did. They granted us the waivers we needed. We have a Medicaid expansion program that's different than any other state, and other states are looking at it to say, hey, federal government, why can't we do that too? So, we might be able to pull that off, I think.
What has Susan thoughts on that?
Well, we're talking about such massive departments. I mean, there are billions and billions of dollars that flow through here. These are not, it's not like combining the DNR and DEQ, the environmental and natural resources departments that are considerably smaller. And the previous governor did that. And as soon as this governor came into office, he quickly undid it. So,
Smart fellow he is.
The thing is that it always sounds good. We're going to break down inefficiencies. We're going to streamline everything. But especially with departments this big, this is a massive undertaking. And I don't think that we will see an answer by the end of this year, maybe not the end of next year.
The governor has perhaps softened his image through this proposal, talking about a river of opportunity. He didn't stand in the way of the 300-some same-sex couples their marriages being allowed to stand. Are we seeing a different governor this second term? Throw that one up in the air.
Well, we're still going to the Supreme Court for the marriage question in general.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps
I
if
think
we
it's
had dropped that lawsuit, I think that may be a fairer statement.
Mm-hmm.
But, you have to be one of those lucky 300 to have your union recognized. And as we know, a lot of clerks weren't even open that day.
I just think it's a great situation, whoever's responsible for it, that those 300 couples are not just roommates anymore.
I don't know if we've seen, I think he's seeing the political realities on this, that the tide is turning. Even Bill Schuette, I think, is seeing the political realities are moving.
I'll stop you there.
No, he punted that issue to the governor, though, didn't he?
He acquiesced.
He acquiesced. He could have taken the hard line.
Cultural warrior Bill Schuette will be there when it's time to run for governor.
However, he didn't take the hard line on this one, though. He punted to the governor's office. I don't think they were happy about that.
But this was a minor case. The real punt would have been to say, okay, let's just drop our lawsuit. We know where the Supreme Court is going on the marriage issue in general, and they're still fighting it.
That's a good point. Anyway, they get to the point here, though. I think he's the same pragmatic governor that we've seen before as far as how he approaches the budgets and businesses and so forth. I think the business tax credits is kind of an example of that. Obviously there's businesses are going to get a lot more out of this budget because of these tax credits, but it hasn't really been balanced out anywhere else as far as, do businesses pay more in this budget than they will before? Is he recommending that? And the answer is no, and I think that's leaving him open to criticism from Democrats that you are the friend of big business or just business in general, and this is just another proof of this. And the other guys and the general public isn't really seeing the benefits from this improved economy.
Well, as a Democrat, I don't see any problem with being a friend of big business. Big business employs people. We're not seeing the results of his first budget.
As far as the gains?
As far as gains. Because I do think if his economic policies took hold the way they were promised to, we wouldn't be back to deficits even, or we would have smaller deficits than we have right now.
So what is this telling you?
What is this telling me? That his tax cuts for businesses were not successful.
We have the lowest unemployment rate in years, and we have
It's
people.
still higher than the
It's still higher than the federal.
Okay, but it's better than it has been in years, and we're not in a deficit budget, other than what the previous administration did for tax credits that are now coming to roost.
Yeah,
so
but
they're
like
gonna
you
have to pay
said,
for those.
but see, there's this whole myth that it was all Jennifer Granholm. I mean, the fact of the matter is, your guy made it easier for some of these chickens to come home to roost.
Also, I covered the Senate for years. It was a Republican Senate. There was hardly anybody standing out there saying, this is a bad idea.
No, it was a different time.
Let's
People-
not give out these credits. It
people
was
were
a
desperate.
bipartisan policy.
Yeah, people were desperate to try to get these jobs to stay, and now we have changes that have made that I think you are seeing a stronger economy. I mean, the economy is growing. You have lower unemployment rates. You have more people finding jobs. You have people coming back to Michigan. We're not an outbound state anymore.
We
like
are an
we used
outbound
to be.
state, absolutely.
We're certainly not leading the nation as an outbound state that we
Well,
We're
used
not
to
the
be.
we've
biggest
done
loser.
three.
You can't take, regardless of whose fault it was, you can't take a decade of economic doldrums and turn them around in just a few years. It does take time, and you're going to see that growth continue, but it's going to
But
take
when
time.
Democrats make that
49
argument about Obama, Republicans say, no, enough time has gone past, the economy should be a lot
We're
better by
49th
now.
in job growth. That should not be the case with these economic policies. I mean, I understand that these have been good times for some people, but if you look at
I'm
per
still
capita
waiting for people to
income,
tell me where the right to work jobs are.
Well, the right to work isn't fully in effect, so let's start with that,
Okay,
too.
but
It's going to take a
but
long time
new
because of
businesses-
moves that the unions
new
made to lock in
businesses-
right to
new
work for a
businesses
long
can
time.
walk right into the state. Where are the new businesses now that we have this vaunted right to work policy? No one can point to one. I mean, please, one.
There are more jobs, and a lot of it is because we are
Magical
attracting
fairy
people
dust
as
jobs.
right to work. Well, you can take that position, but the reality
No,
is
that is the reality.
once you see right to work officially and formally go into full effect, I think you're going to see some
You know
more
what?
changes.
The
But
reason-
it's just one piece of the
Plenty of
puzzle
new
too.
businesses
The
can
problem
roll in.
the problem we ran into, maybe this is the problem we had with MEDC before, is there were too many people that said if we just did this one thing, everything will be better. And then it didn't work. And then say, okay,
But you
if we
guys
just do
sold
this one
right to
thing,
work
it'll all
after
get
one
better.
thing.
The reality is it takes a lot of different things. There's a lot of pieces to
Okay,
this puzzle.
then when you're selling right to work and ramming it down people's throat, you have to have a more nuanced argument. But
all
that's
right,
not what you guys
the
did.
fact is the governor would have won by a lot more than 4 points if people believed that the economy was improving the way you're saying it has.
I think the governor won because people
The
believe the
governor
economy
won
is
a very
improving.
close race, and he deserves credit for winning. But if this
That's it.
economy,
Governor won, period.
If
That's
this,
all you
no,
need to
it's
know.
not period. If we're talking about the economy, if the economy was going gangbusters, and look, you make a compelling case for him, he's your boss. But if the regular everyday voter believed that, this guy would have won by 20 points again, and he didn't.
I think in general, I think politicians get too much credit when the economy's good and too much blame when the economy's bad. I don't think Granholm was as bad as immediate history would think so, and maybe the governor's policies haven't contributed as
she's
much
been
to the
taking
economic growth
She's been
as.
taking it on the chin over these tax credits, and nowhere in the media narrative has it ever been that I've seen, not once, that this was bipartisan legislation.
All right. While they disagree, I'm going to say goodbye. Thanks for watching. We'll be back next week.